Welcome to part 3 of my tutorial for Godhead, and this is going to cover stage 3. And I heavily edited down the main boss fight of this level, Shannon, because it took me probably 10 minutes or longer to beat her with a very tedious method I used. So I'm going to edit that down and I'm just going to explain what I did. And if you want to watch the full version of that boss fight, you can always check my full playthrough of hard mode, which I have posted up all in a single video, or I have it posted up in about 42 parts when I originally did it, which is a lot to sort through. So I would recommend going with the full video and scanning through that if you want to see that. But there's really not much to see. You'll see the method. I leave it on long enough to see the general idea so you can see what I'm doing. I don't really recommend, using that method unless you're really having trouble with the boss and you have some patience, because it'll take very long to do. It is very safe, but it's a very tedious method. See, when I first beat this game, I was just trying to beat it by any legit means possible. So I wasn't trying to create a tutorial or demonstrate anything. I was just trying to beat the game. So I was just stubborn with not bothering to really learn how to fight her on hard. On normal, it was easy enough, but on hard, she could be quite difficult. So instead of learning how to really deal with her moves, I just kind of did some exploitative shit that I figured out. But yeah, I'll explain that later. Unfortunately, I won't really be able to explain a faster and better method of beating her, but it should be a method that anyone can pull off with enough patience. So yeah, to start off, we're going to be dealing with a lot of typical similar type of enemies that we've been dealing with in the previous 2 stages. So if you've gotten this far, then you're going to be accustomed to dealing with this kind of shit. There's going to be quite a bit of enemies to deal with in certain parts, but it's really not going to be anything too different than what we've been dealing with so far. So there's not going to be a ton to really explain in terms of strategy. The main thing is going to be, knowing which areas you can kind of skip through and avoid enemies in certain parts. And unfortunately, since this wasn't a speed run, I don't have all that mapped out as far as like everything that can be skipped. So I won't be able to really show, everything that's going to be skippable. I did try to watch over some speedrun footage to get an idea. But sometimes it's hard to remember, all the parts that were skipped in the speedruns. But I always recommend checking a speedrun, because it's only about 5 or 10 minutes for each whole level. And, you watch over the speedrun and you'll be able to see exactly what you can skip. So, keep that in mind if you want to save some effort and time, and you're just looking to beat the game, then just do that, because there's no real sense in defeating enemies you don't have to beat, because you can get money through the gambling between stages. So you don't really need to farm enemies unless you're really trying to get items off of them. But, it's rare they drop good items. So yeah, here I'm just clearing out these enemies. I use a area of effect attack to clear out the group. This is a checkpoint, I believe. I believe when you see the doors open, you get the checkpoint. And that pretty much applies to whenever that happens in this whole stage. And in the game in general, a lot of times when you see a cinematic with doors opening, it's usually a checkpoint. So if you die, you'll probably get to start here. So I mean, at least that it's divided up into checkpoints, it's not as difficult as it could be. So for this part, I kind of recklessly just ran through all these traps and got to the end of the stage and just started fighting enemies in that area. You can also knock enemies into the traps for a lot of damage if you want to do that, which may be a decent technique. I always like having these umbrellas on hand, because if you smack a guy with it or throw it, you do a lot of initial damage. I don't like the fat enemies too much, as they can be very irritating. They bullet at you from across the screen, so that was a priority target that I wanted to work on first. That's a big part of the crowd control in this game, as well as, targeting the most dangerous enemies first, the ones that give you the most trouble. Now, the whip woman would be another one that I would target first as well, but since I didn't engage her, I was able to take out the fat guy first. But if she comes out and starts fighting, then you may want to take her out even before the fat guy, because the whip is very annoying. It just depends what enemy you think's going to give you more trouble. For these tall guys, it's better to just deal with them alone, because they're kind of tricky and they're kind of tedious to fight. You have to dodge them a lot and counter. And they can take a lot of hits. They're a lot harder than most of the regular enemies. The fat guys and the whip bitches are more annoying, though, because they have faster moves and they can cover a lot more distance a lot faster. So for these tall guys, you can kind of keep your distance and, stay away from them. But the fat enemy and the whip are kind of tricky with distance attacks. So I could have had an opportunity to knock him into that spike, that moving spike, but now he's almost dead. You have to kill that enemy, at least that enemy. He may be the one to target. If you just want to get through the level, you might be able to run to the end and just target him. And then get the key and just leave, because you need one key to exit that area, and he has the key. I don't know if the same enemies always have the key, but I'm guessing they probably do. This is one of the more amusing fights. Some of the cutscenes I watched again because they were pretty fucking funny. But that's one thing about this game. It doesn't take shit seriously. I like that. It's got that Japanese humor. So, for this guy, he's pretty simple. I mean, I use my God Hand. I saved up the God Hand. I recommend saving it up from the previous area if you can, because then you can use it on him immediately, obviously, and do a ton of damage right at the start of the fight, which I would recommend saving it for that, but it's not necessary. We have this chain yanker, and we're going to use this yes ma'am kablam combo to extract God Hand, which I explained many times in the previous video. That's going to be the technique for most bosses. Now, I was only able to do that once because I only had one roulette, but this guy's not too hard to fight toe-to-toe as long as you dodge his slamming attacks by rolling back. You can pretty much go up to him and punch him and guard break him as you do the normal enemies, and he's pretty easy to fight. You do have to dodge his attacks, but see, I already had another God Hand ready, so I was able to get that in. You get in a good rhythm with getting God Hands and, extracting it from the enemy with that yes ma'am kablam move, which is essential for these boss fights. Maybe not so much this one. I mean, this would be pretty easy either way, I think, but if you press X, you can avoid that. Sometimes the button prompt may change to a different button. I'm not sure, but it's it's not too hard to avoid. I just fucked up, but either way, I beat it with no life left, so it was good enough. You of course can't skip the bosses, so yeah, that's a boss. You have to fight him to get the key. So yeah, as usual, I recommend always using the barrels or boxes to throw at the enemies initially to try to thin their health out as much as possible. You have a rocket launcher here you can use. I mean, you could ideally save it up for the hardest enemies if you wanted to be more efficient with it. I just used it. I didn't really give a shit, but I mean, I probably could have used it on a harder enemy. But if you hit multiple enemies with it, it's at least useful. And then you can whip the enemy with it. You have some invincibility frames while grabbing shit, but not when you finish grabbing. So I got it knocked out. See, that fucking bouncing clown has quite a range, so that's why that clown would be a priority in this situation with the mix of enemies available. He also likes to retreat. They can be irritating enemies. Luckily, no demons have appeared yet in this level, but depending on luck, you may get a demon appearance, which can be very hard to deal with. A lot of times I use my roulettes and shit to deal with them. And of course, you get a checkpoint whenever you enter a new area, but I think there's another checkpoint here when the doors open again, like usual. So after you clear out these guys, the doors should open. I believe you have to kill all these guys for the doors to open. So I don't think there's any way to rush through this area and skip anything. But soon, the next wave of enemies will appear through a door, and that'll activate the checkpoint. Getting cornered is always dangerous on this mode. So yeah, since that was probably the harder of the enemies available, I threw the umbrella at him to get a little initial damage. You might be able to do more damage by whipping them with the umbrella, but it's such a slow attack. The umbrella is hard to use on hard mode because the enemies are so fast on this mode. So you can attempt to do that, though, if you want. But it wasn't so hard that I needed to get maximum damage with the umbrella. I wasn't too worried about it. But it's always good to try to isolate and single out enemies and have, if you can have one chase you, that's even better. You can test out the distances in this large arena by, running all the way back and retreating and seeing who chases you. A lot of times you'll get like only one guy to chase you or something like that, and that makes it way fucking easier. So there's crowd control and crowd manipulation techniques like that to manipulate the AI. Always hugely useful. I mean, that's pretty much the whole game on hard mode is crowd control and crowd manipulation. So yeah, normally I don't know if this woman has a whip. I don't see it on her, but I think she's just like a regular thug. But so now you got the next little, wave of enemies, and when that door opens, the next checkpoint is activated. And there's also a door here that you have to fight. One of those fighting doors that you have to fight and break. I believe you can skip this whole area by attacking that door. So if I wanted, I could have used my God Hand on that door. I think I also have to hit this lever, though, too. Right, see, the lever activates the door that you have to fight. So now if I wanted to, I could leave this entire area and not try to get these boxes or deal with these enemies. But I'm kind of obsessed with opening boxes. Doesn't really make any sense, though, because I had full roulettes and full God Hand. There really wasn't anything I was going to gain out of those boxes. I didn't need money. So, it was a little sloppy. So, so now I'm able to go to the door, and I may actually waste my God Hand on the door just to get it over with and get through the next area, which is kind of recommended that you might want to do that. You might want to save up your God Hand, because if you beat that door, then you can skip a bunch of enemies, which means that you don't have to waste resources fighting all the enemies. So I would say you might want to use your God Hand on that door. I mean, that's what I ended up doing. I'm not sure exactly where the checkpoints are. See, the umbrella wasn't working too well, so I think I gave up on that. And I was being surrounded, so I said, fuck it, let me just target the door. So I used my God Hand here, and then I just punched the shit out of the door. And of course, you're invincible during God Hand use, so you can just focus on the door, and you have more than enough God Hand to take care of the door. So now you're in the next area. Now, I don't know if this is a checkpoint. I can't confirm that. It may or may not be. But I'm not going to say for sure. But I know that by skipping into this area, there was a lot of enemies in the other area that I don't believe came back out through that doorway, so I didn't have to fight them. Unfortunately, there is some hard battles in this area. For me, anyway, I had to deal with a demon that came out of one of the enemies. I think it's a random thing, like I said, with most enemies when the demons come out. But some of them, I believe, are scripted and always come out of the same enemy. So I can't say which is the case in this scenario, because this was like 2 years ago that I beat this. But I probably wouldn't even fucking remember if it was if I had just beaten it. I'm not really good at remembering certain things. Especially if I beat something one time on my first attempt, I'm not gonna know what happens had I failed. But yeah, so now you got this demon coming out, and these guys are aggressive as fuck, obviously, as you can see. So I start off by trying to utilize all my resources, which now is the umbrellas. So I'm trying to grab them and throw them at the demon to get a nice head start. But it ends up being very dangerous, and I do end up almost dying from trying to do that. By using R1, you can do that 180-degree turn really fast and try to throw at them, but it is still very dangerous. But I got in 2 hard hits from throwing the umbrella, so now I have a good starting point. I'm still trying to save up my roulettes a little bit, so I'm not wasting it immediately. But when my life gets down to the bare minimum, then I will start using, various things. Now, if the next area was extremely hard, I'd probably reset the entire encounter and do it over, because I wouldn't want to waste. I'd want to go into the next area with as much gear as possible, But here I am still trying to hold out. I think I used it on that one regular enemy because, he was kind of in the way. And I think I was hoping for some area of effect damage, which I may have. I'm not sure if I hit the demon in area of effect. But here I pull off a counter. If you press the circle button at the right time, you'll get a counter. But I don't know exactly how that works. I rarely ever did that. It's very useful if you can set that up, though. There's a lot of depth to this game. A lot of things I still didn't understand even when I beat it. There's really a lot to the moves and juggles and all counters and all kinds of shit. Very, very detailed game. Once that guy's dead, I think you can exit this area. I don't think you actually need a key. It's odd because usually you would need a key to go through a door. Here I think you just have to beat the demon. And I think I can ignore the last guy. But as you notice, when I went through and broke this door, I didn't have to fight all the rest of the enemies. They all stayed behind. So I recommend taking that door down as quickly as possible. And the only way you're really going to be able to do that somewhat easily is if you just use the God hand on the door. I mean, if you don't, then it's going to be hard to dodge all the enemies while you're fighting the door. I mean, you might be able to do it, but it's going to be it's probably going to be not worth trying to do. So yeah, this part. Now this is a boss that's kind of unique. This is 5 enemies at once. And for this, we're not going to be using the Chain Yanker Yes Ma'am Kablam combo. What we're going to be using is Typhoon Kicks a lot because that's a great area of effect attack. Now if you don't have that or whatever, for whatever reason, use another area of effect attack. But Typhoon Kicks seemed to be the most powerful one that I had. And it only uses 1 roulette. So if you can group these guys tightly together and use a Typhoon Kick, you can strip all their health massively. So I recommend trying to group them and then use it. Now remember, using the roulettes, you can use it to slow down time, and you don't have to. You can always cancel out of a roulette. So if you have the roulette set up, you can have everything in slow motion and cancel out until you get just the right positioning. I explained that in the first video with the Mr. Silver and Mr. Gold fight. It's very useful for this as well. So yeah, trying to group them and use those Typhoon Kicks is huge. And eventually, if you don't get in here with a good amount of roulettes, you can easily get good pickups if you die enough times from the barrels. You can also throw the barrels at the enemies for extra damage. There's a lot of options here. So I found it to be pretty easy. More of a fun fight, especially for hard mode. When you fight them again later, it's a very similar fight. It may even be easier because you have more shit. But yeah, use the barrels, throw them at the enemy, especially if you only have 1 left. Strip the health down a little bit and grab whatever you can. And try to save some stuff. If you don't need to use it, then don't use it. Because you're always going to want to have more shit available for later parts, especially Shannon. Shannon boss is extremely difficult, so unless you use my method, which is super, super tedious, but it's still going to be risky if you don't have items because you want to at least get her health down below half health before you do my technique that I use because it takes super fucking long. So if you did that at full health, it might take 30 minutes, so not recommended to use my technique on Shannon with full health, when she has full health. But yeah, this is a pretty easy boss fight. It's more of a fun boss fight, I think. I'm sure it can be hard, depending how you approach it, but if you really group the enemies together, you can do massive damage. And of course, you can use your jump kicks and backflips to retreat, then come back in with a jump kick and nail them. Always take advantage of the stun attacks when you have to press circle to take advantage of the stun animation. And just use what you have. Typhoon Kicks are going to be the main thing to use. Just make sure everybody's grouped together. If you use it on one guy, it's a big waste. But the Chain Yanker and Yes Ma'am Kablam combo, I didn't find to be too useful on that part. So I believe that's why I didn't use it. But you could try using it and build up your God Hand meter. If you do have God Hand, that's another way to really destroy those guys. You can group them together and smash 2 or 3 of them at once while using the God Hand. And you can get them all in stun animations and just beat the shit out of them. You can do a lot of damage with that. So that is another valuable technique you can use. I think I do end up using that on the second time I fight them. But for this part, I found the Typhoon Kicks mostly and the jump kicks to be very useful. Combo them when available. For this, it's just a quick time event. It's kind of hard to see where the cannonballs come out at, but it's the same thing that you probably do on normal. It's just like you just have to try to match the order that the cannonballs came out of and hit the button icon on each cannon that matches the cannonball that came out. But I wasn't really taking it too seriously or paying a hell of a lot of attention to it, so it did take me kind of lengthy on this sequence. But I don't think you really take too much damage if you get hit. I mean, it's still not worth really fucking around, but you probably get a checkpoint after those midgets, so it doesn't matter too much. But yeah, I did a pretty sloppy job on this shit. But yeah, once this is done, get a little cutscene, and now you can go on the boat. And there's really not anything too difficult to deal with on the boat. And there's a lot of fucking item drops on the boat. So, you know, just take your time here. Try to deal with enemies one at a time, and it's pretty fucking easy. Yeah, as usual, break their guard. And after you do enough damage to the guy, he will drop the club. So, you know, take that. I don't even know where that enemy came from. Oh, that's the same guy. Yeah, he looked a little different. But you do have some bomb fucking midgets that hide in treasure chests and in boxes and shit. So just be aware of that, but it's not hard. I may have even been able to exit the area after getting that one key. But I'm not sure. But, you know, of course I want to break all the boxes and shit because, you know, you might get something useful. It's usually worth breaking shit. Because I could still have a full God meter or another roulette. Maybe some more health, but, you know, it may be worth trying to get shit. Of course, sometimes you'll pick up a move or something out of the treasure chest that's useful. But I found myself using a very limited amount of moves that I found to be good. The hand plant kick later on is amazing, which I'll explain that more later. It allows you to pretty much dodge all upper attacks and strike the guy and launch him at the same time. And once you launch a guy, you can hit triangle to do a jumping spin kick on him and launch him into the distance, which does tons of damage. And I don't know if it does tons of damage, but it's great for crowd control because you can knock enemies back by knocking enemies into each other. It's when your crowd control, you know, becomes incredibly efficient. So that, the Yes Ma'am Kablam, and the Chain Yanker are three of my most essential moves. Aside from that, I pretty much use like basic moves in my combos, basic punches and jabs. And I do use a few other attacks, but there's only a few that I really relied on for this mode. I was going for, you know, maximum efficiency, really, not for, you know, whatever worked for me to beat the game. I wasn't trying to do anything flashy. I think the reason I used the God Hand here is because I had a full refill available at the ship that I left at the ship, but then, for whatever reason, I think I forgot to pick up the refill, so, you know, that was sloppy, so I didn't end up having a full God Hand for the next area, but that wasn't a big deal. Unless the area got locked off. It might have got gated off. Maybe that's why I didn't go back. You know, I'm not even sure. It might have been that when I went in there, the gate closed and I couldn't go back. So maybe I didn't forget. But so either way, be wary of that. You know, look out for that because that might be an issue. It's possible I got locked in there. So now soon is coming up the boss fight that I edited down heavily, and I'm going to explain that. I don't think there's too many enemies to deal with here, if I remember right. I think this is a pretty brief area. I think I may have redone one of these early areas because I got to Shannon with such little supplies. And I wanted to have, you know, as many roulettes as possible, God Hand, all that shit. So I may have redid this. You may want to do that too if you find you don't have enough shit when you get to Shannon. You may want to redo one of the previous areas. That's why it's also good in this game to make multiple save slots. I probably should have mentioned that earlier, but it's kind of common sense. It's good to make multiple save slots, so if you want to go back to an encounter, because you know you can save after each encounter, so each checkpoint basically, except for the checkpoints that are in the levels. But every time you go to a new area, you have a chance to save again, so you can do it in a different slot. So yeah, to begin with, I got here with full items pretty much, except for my God Hand. But to begin with, I used the Chain Yanker strategy that I've talked about a bunch of times now, which is I use Chain Yanker to yank the boss in. Then I use Yes Ma'am Kablam twice to extract God Hand from her. And after each Yes Ma'am Kablam, I press up on the right analog to do a dodge cancel, to cancel the taunt animation that he does after he does each yes ma'am kablam move. You know, and I explained that a lot better in like the previous video. I think the second video. But yeah, I use that technique, which is something that we're going to use in pretty much on most all the bosses. Most of them. There'll be some other techniques, but that's going to be a big one. So, yeah, so I use that. So by the time I use all my roulettes with Chain Yanker and the Yes Ma'am Kablams and the stun animations and all that, I have more than half of her health gone. And that's without having to fight her directly at all. So we've avoided any direct conflict so far, and most of her health is gone. So then I follow that up by throwing all the shit in the arena at her. Like I said, this is what you do if you don't know how to fight this boss. If you don't want to learn how to fight her, just be fucking stubborn like I was. It's going to be a lot more tedious and time-consuming, but it's not hard. If you have, as long as you have patience. If you're very impatient, then you may want to actually learn how to fight her. It's up to what you want to do. Like I said, I didn't really care because I knew I was going to beat the game eventually, and that's all I was going for. This wasn't, designed to be a tutorial or anything like that. It was just a playthrough. I was just trying to beat it. But luckily I edited it out because it was probably at least a good 8 or 9 minutes of me doing this technique you're going to see. So I use my God Hand here. Since I picked one up, I just, I waste that on her. And then I have her health down to a decent little fraction, maybe a third or something like that. Or a fourth. It's a decent, her health is down, fairly low. So now what I do is a very simple technique. I'm only going to show it like 2 rounds of it because it's so fucking easy to understand. You don't want to watch me do that for 8 or 9 minutes that it took. So, like I said, I think this whole fight took over 10 minutes, the successful attempt, so it was very long. And it doesn't need to be a long fight. But I didn't really know how to counter some of her moves, and she kept turning me into a dog, which was extremely annoying, so... Also, if you go in that middle gate area, it's kind of a waste because you have to fight hard enemies and you end up using the items that you get on the enemies a lot of times. Unless you do really well, then maybe you can bring more items and fight Shannon, but I preferred not to go in that gate. If you go in a little bit, you can get back out, but if you go to the middle of that arena in there, you'll get trapped in and you have to kill all the enemies, so I recommend not going in there. And I recommend doing this if you're patient. Just run around in a circle and jump kick her, just like that. And as soon as you land a jump kick, you can run right past her. And I just kept doing that for about 10 minutes straight. Just running around that cage in a circle, landing a jump kick and running past her. And I just kept doing loops. Every time I ran past her, I did a jump kick and kept running. If I missed the jump kick or didn't have a chance to jump kick, I still kept running. I didn't try to risk it by getting sloppy and trying to land one when I didn't think I could land it. And it's actually extremely easy if you do it carefully and patiently. But it's going to take very long, so... Keep that in mind. If you really don't know how to fight her and you want an easy but long method, you can just run around in circles and jump kick her. Let me know if you have any questions, and stay tuned for the next part.